Welcome to another episode of CaCo Talks. We are exploring emotional maturity and what that looks like. Because being emotionally immature impacts many more people than you, on this talk we are diving deep into the effects, ways it shows up, and some tools towards becoming emotionally mature.
Before we get started, we want to mention that today's video may be a trigger for some listeners. We are discussing sensitive material that may be a trigger for some. We want you all to know that we deeply value your wellness and mental health. If you believe our discussion may be a trigger for you, please join us in the next CaCo Talks. Yeah, so everybody's like, there's sort of some talk about like what emotional maturity looks like. We certainly all have heard emotional immaturity, right? But we wanted to kind of like define emotional maturity. And what that is being able to manage one's emotions no matter the circumstances. So that's being not only like having an emotion, but being able to really assess what your emotion is and to properly behave as a result of the emotion. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So someone who would be like emotionally mature is somebody who takes responsibility for their actions and behaviors. They show empathy. They recognize their own needs. They aren't afraid to admit when they need help. And they're unafraid of vulnerability. And they also set healthy boundaries. Those are some of the things that, show an emotionally mature person. Although there are definitely, other ways that someone can be emotionally mature. But these are kind of like the big ones. Like, it's people in your life, I guess, who kind of like have their stuff together, or people who really like are kind of level-headed and handle situations, maturely. Like, we can recognize when someone is emotionally mature because their behavior is not a problem. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? Anything to add to what emotional maturity looks like and how that kind of, how that looks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with those. I will say that for me, like an all in all, is just someone that has like a good understanding and a self acceptance. So good understanding, of themselves, as well as a good idea of self acceptance and self worth and who they are. So then they can project that onto other people and also expect that from other people. So.
Yeah, and another thing too is like taking ownership of your reality. I think that's a really, a big one. It's like we all have a reality that is not necessarily. Sometimes it's great, other times it's not so great, right?
Yeah.
But we, when you really own that this is my experience, this is my life, the good, the bad of it, then you're really able. Then you're being emotionally mature because you're able to stand in it and accept it. It's not something you're trying to hide or something you're trying to, get rid of in some way,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is accepting the good, bad, and the ugly about yourself. Maybe some situations that you have experienced, some things that you may not like about yourself or things that you do like about yourself. So it really is like all encompassing in a negative and a positive aspect for the greater good.
Absolutely. And it's not about being perfect. I think sometimes we think maturity means you've reached some level or like status where nothing bad happens or you do not have any kind of negativity happen. That's not the truth. It's being able to say, I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm not able to, sometimes maybe I do have a negative response to things, but I can have that negative response or have that negative feeling and I can still, take that and turn it into something positive or turn it into a healthy emotional expression. You know what I mean? So it is things like, I messed up. I'm sorry. How can we fix this? How can we be better? Admitting that I need help. I don't necessarily know when, or I didn't have the tools to deal with that. So I need help. Where can I find that help? You know what I mean? It's all about, it's about
taking that responsibility.
Maturity. Exactly. It's not about trying to be perfect or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
So yeah. And another key word, big word that people talk about is emotional intelligence versus emotional maturity. And there's a key distinction to know in that, because emotional maturity to me, and feel free to chime in, Caitlin, but emotional maturity to me is like a state of being. It's like I either am emotionally mature or I'm equipped to handle any emotional responses. But then emotional intelligence is kind of your IQ, like your ability to perceive and read kind of other emotions, your ability to act emotionally and recognize others'
Yeah,
emotions, you know?
I agree.
What do you
I,
think?
I view emotional intelligence as like a tool, right? It's like the ability to do said thing and or to handle said things versus emotional maturity. It's more of like a within kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So the definition we have for like emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions in a healthy manner, and to handle interpersonal relationships empathetically and like judiciously. That's a big word, but like kind of being a good person, really. You're like
Yeah.
handling relationships well and positively, right?
Hmm.
So it really, emotional intelligence to me is all about one's own ability to see others in the situation, not only
Yeah.
just
It's like a
yourself.
sympathy, empathy kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And the thing is, when somebody does not have emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And
Oh, for
what
sure.
I'm coming to realize in my life is like the people who kind of creep us out or the people who don't who seem to not quote get it or like understand certain social cues, typically they have some, issue with emotional intelligence. What do you think?
Yeah. And I would venture to say most likely emotionally immature as well. Um, because to me, like it starts with from within, right? If you're not able to emotionally handle your needs, how can you handle mine? So your IQ, your emotional IQ is going to be low and your emotional maturity is going to be low. But I do think those things can also be independent.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, they say, that emotional intelligence is actually the biggest signifier of somebody who might, ultimately be successful in their life. It's like,
Really?
despite IQ, yeah. Like,
Hmm.
because, IQ is like, can you recognize patterns and things and like logic?
Hmm.
But emotional intelligence is being able to, like, those are the qualities that would make you a good leader. You know what I mean? Being able
Yeah.
to
Oh, okay.
perceive others' emotions,
Hmm.
and then respond to them properly, or being able
Hmm.
to read, nonverbal cues like body language, having greater self-awareness, being able to use emotion in conjunction with logic to um, to make sound decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
So a lot
Okay.
of people really say that like it's the emotional intelligence skills that people have that would actually make them successful or not.
I can see that too, because I think, in my personal opinion, at this very moment, we don't have a lot of emotionally intelligent um, leaders across the board in our world, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's not celebrated to be emotionally intelligent. You know what I mean?
that too, especially in the masculine male world, it's
That
frowned upon to
patriarchy,
be. Hmm.
it's seen as like
Masculinity,
weak
toxic
somehow.
masculinity. Oh yeah, it's definitely looked down upon if you're a male who is emotionally mature and or emotionally intelligent, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is so sad because like clearly everybody has emotions. Um,
Exactly.
and you're just like breezing over their experiences in life, whether it was traumatic or it wasn't, right? Because even those good things, if you look over them, that can be devastating for anyone too. Um, Everybody wants to be appreciated and let their work be known and appreciated as well. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think that.
no,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I agree with what you said. Like, living the patriarchy where they see emotion, any kind of emotion, as like weakness somehow. It's like
Hmm.
we all are having emotions all the time. Like
Yep.
we are not really full beings if we are not having some sort of emotional response to something. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
emotions actually, like, I mean, don't quote me, but I feel like there's got to be some sort of like tie to having an emotion with like biology. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah.
just as animals, it's like an emotion probably is instinctual. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like having can like be a part of survival. Like, if
For
I
sure.
have a negative emotion or if I feel some sort of way about if I'm a dog, and
Gosh,
I
I feel
feel
like it's
some
just
sort
a
of way.
cue. It's like a stressor. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
it's
your
like a
body.
stressor because stress is,
Hmm.
is a form as a form of emotion. So it's like if I have a stress about this or I have some sort of fear of this, then I
Yeah.
will respond properly and not go there. That could save my life. You know what I mean?
Exactly. To me, it's kind of like, in a different realm in a way. It's kind of like those things we discussed in the narcissist episode about the flight, flan, flop, and all that good stuff. It's
Mhm.
basically that, in my personal opinion. Your
Yeah,
body is giving you set emotions or responses so that you can then act to either, fight or flight.
exactly.
That's simple, in my personal opinion. But if you're not using that, then that could definitely be damaging, which is why emotional maturity and having a good emotional intelligence is important.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I just to go back to like the patriarchy thing, I think when you focus so much on like trying to alleviate and not have any, or not alleviate, but get rid of all emotions or whatever, then you're
Mm-hmm.
totally dismissing, the people who pretty much are working for you, working with you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and that's why I think like honestly the great resignation and everything that's happening right now just with like corporate culture, companies are realizing that their employees are valuing emotional intelligence or valuing that sort of intelligence over any kind of logic model or like
Mm-hmm.
production model. It's like, are you paying attention to the needs? Are you showing empathy towards the people who are working for you or not? And if you're not, then we'll leave. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
For
I think
sure.
emotional intelligence is something that has always been, in the patriarchy specifically, it's always been kind of sidetracked as somehow weaker. But
Mm-hmm.
really, that's what makes you more successful or not. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
for sure. Oh, for sure. I totally agree. It's so funny because like men are always um, talking trash about women and their emotions and their emotions. And don't be wrong, in some ways, emotions can maybe lead you down a path of self
Reckless
destruction or
emotions.
recklessness. But I feel like if you are emotionally sound, so emotionally mature, and you have a good emotional intelligence, then you don't have that as much, right? But could you imagine if women, for example, ran the world and they were emotionally mature and emotionally intelligent? We would be in a different place.
Exactly.
100%. We will be in a
You know what?
completely different place.
And the issue that what a lot of them are saying is they're throwing off certain kinds of emotions because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times they will recognize anger
Yep.
and frustration only, which
Mm-hmm.
are emotions, but that's the only emotion that they feel like they can express, anger and aggression,
Exactly. Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's like you are actually actively having emotional responses all the time. And I have seen grown mantrums, which
Oh,
the
for
first time
sure.
I saw a grown mantrum, I was like, oh no, we're really doing, like, you're really having a mantrum right now
Oh, yeah.
in front of everyone. And then in the same breath, be like, women are too emotional. And I'm like, you don't see that you just went off on the FedEx guy? You don't see
For
that?
no
You
reason.
don't see,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the FedEx guy for no reason. You don't see that you just stormed out of this building because you had a negative interaction with a customer.
On
You know what
top
I'm
of it,
saying?
then being excused because you're a male. Like,
And then
no,
yeah,
no, no.
and then being coddled by a manager
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Well, oh, so and so, just we need to like talk to him and just work him through it." It's like women are too emotional, but you just have this big emotional outburst for everybody to see. You clearly show that you cannot handle your emotions in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot
Yep.
manage your emotions in this moment. But because it was anger and aggression, it was expressed as that, it's seen as
Mm-hmm.
acceptable somehow from you. It
Yeah.
was like, oh God, I hated that moment. But it was such a, like, when I saw that, I was like, wow. Because this is, not only does it show you cannot manage your own emotions in a moment of frustration, but you're also going to then use that moment to, you know, justify your like misogyny too. Like you're going to
Yeah.
say like, it's okay when I do it, but when women do this, then
It's
they're
not
just
okay.
too emotional somehow, you
Yeah.
know? So, which that in itself shows a lack of emotional intelligence because you're not able to recognize somebody else's like experience. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
It's definitely, the double standard is definitely there for women versus men, especially when it comes to emotions in general. So,
yeah,
um, first of all, how we always talk about women equality and women's right, but we need to started getting equality for emotional maturity and emotional intelligence for men. Because also, I think women are, you have to meet women where they are these days. Women can provide for themselves. So you got to be coming correct as a man entering into a woman's life these days. And, a
A
lot
lot
of
of
them
them,
just aren't there.
a lot of them
Like we no
aren't.
longer
Yeah,
need men to, provide for us and pay the bills and stuff. We can do those things ourselves. So the least that you can bring at this point, because we can take care of ourselves, is emotional maturity and emotional intelligence.
exactly. I would 100% agree with that. And I think that's going to continue to be a big divide. And I think that's why a lot of men are just not, or quote, not understanding why like women just don't get with them or opting to stay single. And it's
Yeah.
because why would I deal with someone who has the emotional intelligence of a toddler
I can just go have a toddler.
when I could just have a child? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If that's what
Yeah.
I really wanted. And then a lot of women are just like, I don't want the child or the man.
Either.
I'm just like,
Exactly.
do none of it. Because,
Yeah.
dealing with somebody who's emotionally immature and doesn't have the emotional intelligence, that is a job.
Oh, for sure.
That's not some light work. That's a job, And
Absolutely.
yeah, so and then, the thing that always gets me is when I see adults, people 30, 40, 50, having these outbursts and not able to emotionally regulate. I'm like, it's sort of shocking to me because I'm like, you got to your big age and
Mm-hmm.
cannot emotionally
Handle
regulate.
yourself. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like,
I see it every day at work. So I work in healthcare at the moment. And I work on a floor where the building itself is for cancer patients, right? So we have a lot of emotions and different things going on. But it is like an in and out type of care. For like imaging and stuff like that. But when I tell you, you see like it's just like an environment that's just like me, like a child, or like you'll have like outburst for various reasons, which I get. Like they have things going on, but like my gosh, I am human. I have emotions too. And there's just a certain level of respect that you should have for someone who you're talking to. And if you're not going to have that, then everybody at the desk with me, we have all just agreed, like we're just walking away. Like we will not be talked to like that because you lack emotional intelligence.
exactly.
We're just not dealing with it. But yeah, the adults, and I'm talking older adults too, like 60 probably to like above.
Mm-hmm.
Very immature, which it could be a generational thing. That generation, they really didn't talk about things. They really didn't deal with things. Everything's just kind of pushed and suppressed down. But at this point, you have to be your own advocate. You have to work towards those things for yourself. It's for nobody else to do. So there really is no excuse now.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean that's a good point. Is like what you were saying made me think of like Karens. Like people know what Karens are now,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like that's clearly an example of somebody who cannot emotionally regulate or somebody who actually uses emotions to manipulate situations, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, the outburst, yelling at service employees, not able to perceive that somebody else is having an experience of them, not thinking even about everybody else in the space watching them, looking at them, just my needs need to be met and I'm going to yell and scream or put someone down until they get met.
Yep. Yep. Which is what a child does. You know what I mean?
Literally.
And
that's
a
why
child does that because they cannot advocate for their needs.
exactly, that's
Versus
the
an
only way
adult,
they
you
know.
have the ability to advocate and you just choose to result to that.
Exactly.
Like, no.
And that's why
we are not
I
accepting.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm glad you brought up the point of a child and like a toddler. It's like the easiest way to me to spot somebody who is emotionally immature or emotionally unintelligent is does their behavior mimic that of a child, of a toddler? And that's why, like, that's the simplest way you can kind of evaluate quickly. Because somebody who really throws like adult tantrums or like storms away or can't seem to like in the moment at least take a step back and be like, hey, how can we productively work through this? If they can't do that, if everything has to be external, they lack the emotional maturity and the emotional intelligence. Because think about a kid.
Agree.
Yeah. Think about a child. The only way their needs get met is if they cry, scream, yell, let someone else know that they need something, and then the other person has to fix it. That's essentially
until they're taught different.
until they are taught different, until they are taught to emotionally regulate. Then they say, how can I meet my needs? Or maybe I need to calmly ask someone to help me meet my needs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But adults, when they're doing that, they're doing the same thing a toddler is doing. They're reaching
100%.
out and putting all of basically their emotional management, their emotional regulation becomes the other person's task, problem to figure out.
Yep.
And that's what's exhausting about it, you know?
Yep.
What do you think? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like, for example, back at work, people are constantly putting their emotional needs on you. And don't be wrong. Like, I understand the environment because it is a cancer center. So you see a lot of patients who have cancer or maybe being diagnosed or testing to see if they may have cancer. So I get that, you know what I mean? Or being concerned and having a sense of urgency. But at the same time, like, if I'm taking another patient in front of you, I'm not going to drop everything I'm doing or push another patient behind so you can get your needs met. That's something a child would do, you know? And even when you have a child, you sit down and explain to them, hey, we cannot do this right now. Maybe I'm doing something with someone else, you know?
Exactly.
You come to an understanding of, I cannot do this with you. But adults, it's on a whole nother level because you have the tools to be patient and to be understanding and to wait your turn. You know, those are basic things are taught in like kindergarten.
Exactly. Or should be.
So why are we not using that at 60?
Exactly.
You know, like I'm confused here. So
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just shows a lack of emotional intelligence. And it's like, it's not that it's always men doing that. Like women will do it too. I've seen lots of emotionally intelligent women as well, you know, but, it really is it's an inability to regulate your own emotions and to recognize others' emotions in that moment. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
That's one form. But I think another form of low emotional intelligence is people who are unable to read body language, facial expressions, and other nonverbal emotional cues. And people, and those, to me, that's a different category where you get into the creep. Somebody who cannot, or who seems to not be able to process that somebody else is having a different experience of them than they feel like they're projecting. And you know what I'm saying? And
I feel like that border is more of like that also entwines a social aspect. That's, to me, that's almost beyond emotional, but obviously it affects the emotional intelligence. However, you know, that is a huge problem, which I also think ties back to masculinity in a way as well, because it's, you know, you're just like, everything is yours. You can have everything you want. Let's make an excuse if it's not yours, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's like all interactions with people should be the way I think they should be. So if you are, you know, and we'll take it from the case of dating, because I think this is the most clear. In the case of dating, if a man or somebody is approaching another person, if they see this interaction going positively in their head, so they ignore every other social cue, somebody pulling away from them, somebody walking away from them, somebody not trying to shut down a conversation, somebody, you know, kind of like dismissing them. They take every cue to mean continue. That's what I mean by like, they're just not reading nonverbal cues, or they don't want to read nonverbal cues, which shows a low
like
emotional
blatant nonverbal cues, not like subliminals.
Yeah, like blatant nonverbal cues that are saying like, this person does not want to interact with me. And I think a lot of times we see that with men, just because a lot of times they feel like if I put effort in, quote effort in, then I should get certain response from this woman, right?
And to add to that, I would say even verbal cues, they will ignore that to fit their narrative. So it's like, oh, she said no, but, you know, she didn't say no to this. Like, no is a no. A maybe is a no. Anything outside of a concrete yes and a confident yes is a no. If there's a little hesitation, it's a no. Like, that is not, just because you have this little story made up in your mind does not equate to your storyline.
Exactly. And that's why, to me, when I see people who can't read body language, facial expressions and stuff, that is always associated with like creepy behavior to me, because at that point you are either actively ignoring other people's perspective, or you genuinely do not understand like certain social cues, like somebody is trying to get away from me. You know what I mean? Like, and that's always scarier to me, because those people push boundaries. They push far beyond, you normal boundaries. You know what I mean?
And while they're pushing those boundaries, they're definitely not respecting said boundaries. So that's even more of a concern. If you're willing to push them, you're definitely not respecting, which means you're probably willing to do a little bit of anything. So
exactly that to me, the people who have that lower level of emotional intelligence, they always just come off very scary, and you do have to watch them, because at that point it's like, I don't know what new boundary this person is going to continue to cross.
Yeah, or what
and
they're
that's why it's
capable of,
important to
'cause they
have
will
an
make their own
emotional.
story.
What'd you say?
I said, or what they're capable of, because they will make their own story.
Exactly. Yes, that's why it's important to have emotional intelligence. It's not just some, kind of like hippie, like we want everyone to like feel good and like be well and like everybody, you know what I mean? It's not some kumbaya
Yeah.
thing. It really is. If you lack emotional intelligence, you put other people's lives kind of in danger, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in fluctuating situations, like, you know what I mean? Or sketchy situations, like, yeah.
I agree with that.
Emotional intelligence is important to have and to foster. And the thing is, emotional intelligence isn't one of those things that you either got it or you don't. You can be taught to have emotional intelligence, which is why while we're putting it in the conversation with trauma, it's like, if you have experienced some sort of trauma or whatever, you can take that trauma, heal from it, learn to better gain skills to be an emotionally intelligent person, or to emotionally manage, or to gain emotional maturity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the people that I know who are the most like loudly emotionally unintelligent seem to also, that's linked to me to trauma. You know what I mean? Especially in the form of like bullying, probably at some point, just being us like outcasts, not being somebody people really dealt with. You know what I mean? So when we see those creepy behaviors, it's like, well, look at this person's backstory. Did they actually have they experienced some of that like social ostracization? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
do you think that, like, because to me, it could also be generational as well, right? Do you think like emotionally immature people raising children, for example, leads to even more emotional, or not leads even more, but it leads to the child being emotionally immature? So it's like a cycle.
I think it's a lot easier to have that happen if somebody doesn't step in and reevaluate, take the time to look at their trauma, accept it, heal from it, move on, and decide to be better. Then you end up, it's so much easier to just replicate those cycles and to develop habits of being emotionally unintelligent. You know what I mean? Because I think you can learn habits of being emotionally unintelligent just as much as you can learn habits of being emotionally intelligent.
For sure.
Like both can be taught. It's like if I see mom and dad, or mom, hauling off every time a minor inconvenience happens, when I'm an adult and a minor inconvenience happens, and if I don't reflect on that behavior, I haul off too, because that's how we handle these situations. You know what I mean? And the issue, like we were saying, the issue is typically somebody else who has nothing to do with that situation gets hurt. And that's the sad part about it, is like somebody has to deal with your outburst if you're emotionally unintelligent. Somebody else has to deal with the emotional backlash of, frankly, you'd probably traumatizing them. You know what I mean? Because you just were not able to emotionally regulate in that situation. Yeah. So, I think, and I actually, just to bring us back to a personal situation, like I was saying, the people that I know who lack emotional intelligence, like I've just had situations with like just people harassing and like borderline stalking, if not completely stalking, right? So lacking the ability to read, not just read body language, but to really hear verbal cues and still not, you know what I mean, not take the cue and leave people alone. Then who gets impacted by that? Who has to take alternate, you know what I mean? Who steps to protect themselves? Who has to set new boundaries? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not that it's not that you're not suffering or whatever whatever that other person feels. I now have a problem that has nothing really to do with me. It has to do everything with how you feel about you or you feel about your life. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's important to heal so that you do not go and affect others. You know, I think that's a big reason why we should heal is like, I mean, as bad as it sounds, and this is my own opinion, I don't know if Caitlin agrees, but if it was like people are emotionally intelligent, unintelligent, and they do these things in outbursts and it only affected them, I'd be like, whatever. Go in the corner, have your tantrum, and if you can't self-regulate and it hurts you, oh well. The issue comes when it affects other people. Like, if you want to be a ball of anger, be a ball of anger. Don't throw that ball at everybody else. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
What do you think
and
about
it's
that?
really not everybody's else. It's not really, everybody's problem or a problem to deal with, And I'm talking like, I could see a little bit of emotional immaturity, or say you're not even fully. I think, say someone caused you some trauma and you just maybe can't be around that person or something like that, and you're trying to figure it out in the process of that, and okay, that may be justified, right? Because you're trying to figure it out, and that person has caused you harm in some way, shape, or form. But I'm talking about people in like your workplace who has nothing to do with your trauma. Yeah. We're talking about people that you meet just out and about, have nothing to do with your trauma, just day-to-day things that strangers that you're coming into contact with. There's just no excuse.
Exactly.
Like, you being bitter and angry towards me when I've done nothing to you is ridiculous, Exactly. And don't be wrong. Like, if this was, you're just having a bad day, like, I understand you having a bad day, but you need to know how to handle yourself in that. That does not mean you have a 5-year-old tantrum being 46 at some individual who has no idea what is even going on.
Exactly.
You need to redirect your anger at something or someone who has maybe caused it, and or find another way to channel that. Not directed at a stranger. They did nothing to you. They're going about their lives. And I promise you, you're going to be the one still hurting at the end of that. They're going about their lives.
Exactly. And
they could care less.
Even people who are close to you, you have to know whose fault the situation, like who to go and explode or how to express that emotion clearly. Like what the problem is. You can't, because you have a problem, over here with Sally, it doesn't mean you got to slap John. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And that's what a lot of people end up doing emotionally. They really have an issue either with themselves or with Sally. And then the only way they feel like they can express it clearly, or the only way it comes out, because they haven't reflected, they haven't assessed their trauma, they haven't healed, they go and slap John. And then it's like, John is sitting here like, he's the only one with a physical ailment now because he got a handprint on his face. You know what I mean?
And the thing is, even towards Sally, you can't go and physically hurt Sally either. I promise you, it's not going to help anything. It's only going to make it worse. Then you're going to have Sally coming back to get you. So, it really is important to be intelligent when it comes to other people and what their needs are, and knowing how to handle even yourself in a way that is productive for you and the other person without anybody getting further hurt in the process, because then it comes back on you hurting somebody else.
Exactly.
Which gets you nowhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that leads to another point. What is emotional management? Because we're discussing like what the negative emotional intelligence looks like, right? Like not being able to control it. But what does it look like to actually be able to control your emotions and manage them in the moment? And so the definition for emotional management is the ability to understand, accept, regulate. That's a big one. Regulate, express your emotions in a positive, healthy way. Right. So it's like, it's not that I'm not having a negative emotion. It's not that I'm not having a positive emotion or whatever, or not having an experience. Is that I understand it immediately. I can regulate it and say, okay, how does this need to be expressed? And then, it's like a filtering system.
Yeah.
The people that we see who have the most egregious issues with emotional intelligence are the people who have no filter system. It's just like in and then outburst, which is literally what a toddler does. And
I can speak from experience, because I I used to be like that. And don't be wrong, like I definitely speak my mind. However, I do it in a more constructive way now. And I'm more mindful of where people are emotionally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But from experience, I can definitely say that I used to just be like an outburst type of person, and it got me nowhere.
Yeah,
Literally nowhere. Literally nowhere. I was still angry. I was still upset. I was still like, why is this stuff happening to me? It was just like a big ball of mess on top of me
exactly.
projecting it on other people. And now other people are mad at me or like offended by what I've said and XYZ. So it was just like so unnecessary versus if I was, sound mentally and emotionally or just dealt with those things in a different manner, in a more productive manner,
Mm-hmm.
then I would have caused even other people trauma and emotional harm on top of myself. Because now, looking now in hindsight, it's just like, oh, wow, like that was damaging to said relationship or
Mm-hmm.
to said person, when first of all,
Exactly.
I could have felt the way I felt, just said it in a totally different way and not in an outburst.
Exactly. It's not about how you. To me, I don't look at any emotion as wrong. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I look at it as how am I expressing this emotion? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? That
Mm-hmm.
the issue always comes in the expression to me, and the
For
if you
sure.
lack the ability to regulate. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, delivery is key. You
Absolutely.
have to deliver it appropriately, um, in order for it to be received correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. And to go back to not to just rag on men and the patriarchy, but like it's just they collectively have the biggest example of this at all times because a lot of times they're socialized not to recognize emotions and certainly not to regulate them. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
So they try to like live these lives devoid of emotion when they're constantly having them at all times and
Yeah,
then not regulating them on top of that. So I don't know. You can pay me to be a man. You really couldn't. But like but I'm thinking about a male I came into contact with last 6 months or so, um, who just everybody who kind of knew him was like so and so just does not have a filter, just does not have a filter, and that came out in the sense of like he would just say certain things that I was like, do you really just say that? You know what I mean? Or like, did you really just
hmm,
say something that offensive to in public out loud? Didn't have a filter, you know. And then when I really go back and think about it, I think this person just lacks emotional intelligence and lacks the ability to sort of emotionally manage outside of the whole I'm a man, I'm going to be stoic and act like I do not have emotions when I do. You know what I
for sure,
mean? Which is why
because he
there's
definitely does.
yeah, you definitely have emotions and it's fine to have an emotion, but
Hmm.
you have to manage in that moment and not just say whatever or because
Hmm.
there's somebody else who gets hurt, you know? And this is
Hmm.
somebody who would just I became uncomfortable with this person because I personally was like, I'm not going to deal with it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
because I do recognize when people are emotionally immature, there's only so long I'm going to sit around that to be perfectly honest. There really is
for
only so
sure.
long I'll sit around that seriously. And I like when they were just saying some kind of off stuff to me, I was just like, okay, I'm done. But
Yeah,
it kills me that like what I heard later was that like I was awkward in the situation or that I was the person who was like who he felt like was weird, and I'm like, how am I being weird by just not engaging? You know what I mean?
hmm.
By saying I
I think
recognize.
too that like, if this is the person that I think you're talking about,
Mm,
I think I think I think approaching you and your stance was intimidating because he's been allowed to have other interactions with women on
mm-hmm,
a whole different aspect, being emotionally immature and
mm-hmm,
emotionally unintelligent. That was acceptable. So when you're
mm-hmm.
expected to be on a different wavelength,
Yeah,
that can be intimidating. You know what I mean? That can
yeah,
make you nervous, but that does not mean you still don't rise to the occasion.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And to be honest, you hate to say this, and I know this is going to throw a lot of people. If you can't hang where somebody is emotionally mature, don't until you
yeah,
can. That's the truth. And that sounds mean, but don't. You know what I mean?
But I think that's anything. If it's not your crowd, it's not your crowd.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not
Or
like if somebody's around me and they are emotionally immature and it's just something that I cannot handle, then we just can't hang around each other. If I see that you're trying to grow and I can give you some tools or help you along the way, then that's different.
Yeah.
But if you're good with where you're at, you will get cut off.
Absolutely.
There's no need for me to be around you because then you're bringing me down. You know what I mean? In a way. So like, there's just no, and I don't want to operate like that. You know, like I'm pro forgiving and healing and stuff like that moving forward. There's just no need to continue that trauma. You know?
Exactly. And the thing is, when you are emotionally mature, it's so much easier to spot people who aren't. That's
for sure.
That's like you. It's literally like it's almost like breathing. It's like so and so is doing XYZ. They probably aren't emotionally mature. Okay, I know how far. I know where to set the boundary with you, and we move on. You know.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I would agree. Like specifically with that person, it was just like I guess it could be intimidating to see somebody who is emotionally mature and is like forthright about it, you know, as we are. But again, what I say to that is if you can't hang, don't. And I'm not, I know that probably sounds mean, so I want to kind of qualify that. It's not about at that point, you're going to create more problems for yourself by trying to hang where you can't. You know, I think you're only going to end up exploding on this other person, causing more issues and risks with this other person.
Yeah.
And then that's going to come back and be a problem for you too. So if you know you just can't hang, don't. It's like me saying, you know what? Or like trying to go and like lift 300 pounds. If I have not done the work to lift 300 pounds, what do you think is going to happen when I try to lift up that bar?
You're going to literally hurt yourself.
Exactly. I will hurt myself and end up in an ICU. It's called steps. I can work up to 300 pounds, but I'm not at 300 pounds yet. You know, and that takes another level of emotional maturity to say is where am I at? You know what I mean?
I think that person is very that person is really at an emotional state of a youngin for sure. They are just not emotionally sound. They just, and you know, this person being a male as well, has lots of excuses surrounding said emotions as well. So it's just like an all encompassing thing of just issues that person has to deal with first before he can even tap into dealing with that with anybody else or approaching anybody else.
Yeah, you can you can take me out of it. Anybody who would be functioning like adult in the world, you know, really taking care of themselves and doing things for themselves, you know, you have a very low tolerance for that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And it's And it's not even necessarily about age, you know what I mean? Because we're technically young people, and people in their 20s are notorious for being totally emotionally inept, right?
Yeah.
But it's when you've taken the time to do the work to mature and to gain emotional intelligence and to manage your emotions, and you can actually thrive in the world doing that. That's where wisdom comes from. It's not about how old you are.
Yeah,
because believe me, we have come across 50, 60-year-olds, like Caitlin said, at her job, who cannot regulate. And it's actually pitiful to me to see that. I'm like, Lord, at your age, like you live this long, which is a blessing to live that long, and you can't regulate an emotion.
Yeah. Yep.
It feels almost like a waste.
Eye-opening.
You know what do you say?
I said definitely is eye-opening.
It's eye-opening, and it feels like a waste.
That's one thing for sure, it's a waste.
It's like we're supposed to be learning and evolving and growing, and that's what you came to.
Yeah. And definitely makes me like aware for like when I get older, like if I'm like that, if somebody doesn't check me for one, and for two, if I'm that miserable, then maybe I just need to be taken out, because that's just ridiculous. Like, you know, there's so many things in life to be grateful for, you know, and it's just like, you are just bitter and angry. Like, oh my God.
Exactly.
You know, I'm just grateful to be alive this morning. I'm grateful to, you know, have a car where I can get to work. I'm grateful for different opportunities and experience, and you're just angry for something I didn't even cause. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And and the thing too is like emotional maturity and intelligence, as much as that sounds like big words and like it sounds like it's a hard thing, it's the most freeing thing you can get to. Because guess
Oh
what?
yeah.
You're not worried about anybody else. There's
Mm-hmm.
nobody else really but like you, and like, and not in a selfish way, but it's like you're not crowded with all these other traumas, with all these other perceptions of what other people might be thinking about you or what how you might be. You know what I mean? It's not
Oh yeah.
clouded, it's clear.
For sure.
That's why
It's
you
so
want to get to
freeing.
emotional
Oh yeah.
maturity.
It's so
You think?
freeing, and it allows you to tap into yourself. You know what I mean? Figure out
Yeah.
what floats your boat, what doesn't float your boat, what makes you happy, what doesn't make you happy, what your goals are. It gets you in line, really. So, the work is a beautiful process. Don't be wrong. In the beginning, I was like, oh my God, like, why am I doing this? But
Mm,
now that I like hindsight looking, like, I'm just so glad that I made that choice that one, like that day. I'm just like, you know what? I'm no longer going to let my trauma define me. I'm going to be emotionally sound for myself,
exactly.
and now I can project that onto someone else. Which brings me to, so what are some ways that we can get to emotional maturity and become emotionally intelligent, Courtney?
Yeah. So some of the methods that we have are like self-soothing. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good method. And that's not just something for babies. That's as adults. We can self-soothe.
Yeah.
We can show empathy and we can self-reflect.
Yep.
Um, Yeah, and then obviously other things, taking responsibility for your actions, setting
Mm-hmm.
those healthy boundaries with people, being
Yep.
self-aware, taking
Mm-hmm.
ownership of your reality, like we were saying earlier, developing healthy techniques to handle emotions, and being, of course, always able to regulate your emotions. You know what I
For
mean?
sure. And to add on top of that, I would also, in my experience, I would say like doing some self-reflective activities. So like, try, I like going on like little nature walks and stuff like that. So like
Mhm.
hiking and biking, activities that allow you to kind of just reflect over your life and or decompress some of the trauma that you have experienced in your life.
Yeah,
Also journaling, that's huge, whether it's prompted or unprompted. There's a TikTok that I follow, and it has some little like self-reflective, self-awareness prompts that kind of help you identify some triggers in your life, some trauma in your life, heal from those things. So I'd even say that. And then I know one thing that's big for Courtney is creative outlets. So she
mhm,
really dives into her art, expressing herself through her art. So that's also another way, as well as emotional support groups. So whether that's a support group, counseling, therapy, friends, family, pets, if your support system is not your actual family or they are causing you harm or trauma, then making that family that you need to be your support group. So those are some other options as well.
absolutely. Yeah, and I want to go back and like kind of touch on the creative outlets, like Caitlin was saying. Like that is a big thing for me. Like I was discussing earlier in the trauma episode, I believe, or either the narcissism, whatever, whichever one. Just discussing how watching TV and films had always been the only place I felt like safe. You know what I mean? The only place I could kind of
Mm-hmm.
control in those trauma situations. So now being able to have the agency and the ability to create myself to be the creator, that's even more freeing because I'm actually able to put everything that is bothering me, everything that really gets, you know, that is a trauma experience. I can put that in the artwork, and the artwork can speak to other people to hopefully help them reach maybe their own level of emotional maturity, help them
Mm-hmm.
to see something that they didn't see before, you know what I mean? So those
Yeah.
constructive outlets are crucial for me, you know what I mean? And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always have to be something that you share with people. I think that's an important thing to mention too, is
Oh
like
yeah.
I professionally want to be an artist. So, well, I guess I professionally am one, but professionally, so meaning I put it out there so that other people can see it. You can just create, write on your own, paint on your own, maybe make videos on your own, or like you know, do things on your own that help you create and express. They don't have to be shown just because
Yeah.
there is an arena to show things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
So, yeah, as long as you're taking the step to really self reflect and be self aware in order to process your own emotions so that you can grow and to become emotionally mature, um, that's really what's key. As long as you're doing that in a healthy way. I want to make sure we emphasize
Yeah,
healthy,
emphasize that.
because just doing anything doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. You know what I mean? And by healthy, we mean things that do not hurt other people.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
And or yourself.
Or yourself. Yeah. So that's what we mean by healthy. And you said something I said something about regulate that I thought I had something to say, but I don't recall anymore. But yeah, I think maybe does that kind of sum it up for emotional maturity?
So that sums up our episode for emotional maturity. We hope that our discussion kind of opened the door for you to figure out whether you are emotionally mature, whether you're emotionally intelligent, and if you may or may not be, that we can help you figure out some ways to get to that point, right? As well as managing your emotions. So like we said earlier, if you're not emotionally mature or emotionally intelligent, that appears in so many different ways in so many different arenas. So people can see it. So it's important that you work on those things, not only for yourself, but also those around you who you come into contact with. Exactly. So we hope that this discussion helped.
Before we go, I think what you said something about arena, or just about like it really isn't just about you. It's like, and I guess that's the trouble with emotionally immature people, is they see things only about themselves. But and so it's like hard for them to even think like outside of themselves at all. But it's not just about like you trying to, I guess, reach some sort of milestone or whatever. It's about you freeing yourself from the trauma as well. You know what I mean? Or from the negative experiences or adverse experiences. It's about you reaching a level for yourself to achieve that freedom. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that was a good episode. I'm so glad we had, the opportunity to talk about this. I think it's important, and that it's a part of our, mental and emotional health series. Obviously, we could talk about emotional maturity or immaturity all day long, but
for sure,
I think we're gonna wrap it there, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching CaCo Talks. Bye.
Bye.
Before we end this episode, we wanted to take some time to remind our listeners, if you or someone you know are struggling with mental or emotional health or any of the issues we discussed in our podcast, you are not alone. There are resources to help. In the podcast descriptions, we've listed contact information for 3 resources we suggest for crisis situations. You can reach out to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.